With the completion of my first observer ride, I've officially started my IAM training. I thought I'd share with you how the day went and some of the feedback I received. A lot of this is going to vary from group to group, but we met pretty early for a pre-ride briefing and that lasted about an hour. Pretty much just had a chance to meet my observer, talk about my riding experience so far, and things that I wanted to get out of advanced training. I rode a 125 for about 14 months and I've been on my Z400 for about 4 months, on an A2 license. I've covered about 4,000 miles across both bikes, so I've definitely ridden, but I'm still very much a new rider. I think the biggest challenge I'm going to face during my advanced journey is just inexperience. In terms of goals and things that I want to improve on, you can watch my first video where I spoke about this in more detail. After that, it was out to the bikes to do some pre-ride checks before heading out onto the road. If you haven't done any advanced riding before, like a bike safe course, you might be a little bit nervous about the navigation they use. They don't use headsets or intercoms, you just have to look in your mirrors and watch your observer and see which way they're indicating. If you come up to a junction and not indicating, then you go straight. Otherwise, if they're indicating one way or the other, then of course you go one way or the other. Honestly, I think it sounds a lot more daunting than it actually is. We pulled over pretty often, maybe every 20 or 30 minutes, so as long as you can remember the general direction that you're heading in, it's not too bad. But onto the dual carriageway to start the ride properly. I did manage to lose my observer right at this point. I don't know, maybe they didn't have a safe space to merge into, so they had to wait. It took them a little while before they could catch up to me again. I was wondering maybe I'd taken a completely wrong turn in, which was kind of stressful, but they did manage to find me. Most of my riding is on country lanes rather than dual carriageways, and I think it really shows in my confidence. I'm a lot less confident on these kind of roads, even though I'm fairly happy getting up to speed. They said that it's good that I'm happy riding at higher speeds when it's appropriate to do so, and honestly I've never really struggled with that. We pulled over for a debrief after this dual carriageway section, and I had 2 main pieces of feedback. They asked me how I thought it went and I said pretty good, but I felt quite nervous and quite stressed. And the word I used was dense. The traffic felt very dense and everything felt quite last minute. We discussed it for a little bit and came to the conclusion that I think I was making myself feel like that by placing myself too close to cars. So riding quite close to cars will make things feel stressful and things will feel last minute if you're noticing and processing them quite last minute. I think most of my miles just haven't been on roads like this, so if I want to get more comfortable on dual carriageways and motorways, it's just a case of riding on them more often. The second piece of feedback was to do with lane positioning, and honestly, on dual carriageways and motorways, I'm used to just bang centre in the middle of my lane. I associate lane positioning more with bends and country lanes, so I've never really tried to apply them to motorway and dual carriageway riding. But if you take a situation like this where there's a lot of cars queuing to take an exit, any one of those cars can decide last minute that they're not going to wait in that queue anymore. So if I positioned myself a little bit more to the right, I would have been further away from the cars and would have had a little bit more time to react if someone decided to change their mind. Overall, pretty good feedback from the dual carriageway section, and there's a whole observed ride just focused on dual carriageways and motorways further down the course. Next, we did a little bit of town riding before heading out onto the twisty country lanes. There can be a lot of hazards when you're riding in town, so it's really important to look quite far down the road and plan what you're going to do in advance. One of the things that really stuck out here was my slow riding skills, or lack thereof. You can't see on the video, but I tend to waddle my bike a lot or duck walk my bike a lot, which just looks kind of bad and it's actually pretty dangerous as well, because you increase the risk of your feet slipping on the floor. I've started going out and practicing my slow ride controls quite a bit, and this will also help with things like positioning at junctions. Sometimes I'm just so focused on getting my bike under control, I'm not thinking about where I'm actually going to position the bike, so pointing the bike left or right depending on which way you're turning. One idea I started really trying to apply by the end of the ride was the idea of the safety bubble. So if you can imagine the empty space around your bike is an invisible bubble, and you want to make that as big as possible. This is about picking where you're going to put your bike on the road to give you the most space away from potential hazards. It's really helpful to visualise this, I think. Next it was onto the twisties, which in my opinion is the most fun place to ride your bike. I was really lucky to have a decent amount of time following my observer and seeing how he positions his bike around the lanes. I always think that my lane positioning is quite good, but after following my observer I realised that I can move out a lot further than I usually do. He was also positioning for bends a lot sooner than I usually do, which means that you can see further down the road sooner. I thought what makes an advanced rider is being able to take these corners really quickly, and before I started my training I was focused a lot on speed and trying to get faster through the bends. But since I did this little section on the twisties, I realised that I could focus a lot more on just lane positioning and noticing hazards further down the road. For example, aborting this potential overtake because there was a junction on the right, which honestly I didn't even notice in real life and I could barely see it on camera, so I think he did a really good job to spot this. It's really interesting knowing how to keep yourself safe on bends, and I think lane positioning is a huge part of that. For me, I'm going to focus less on speed and more about how I can position my bike on the road. I've mentioned in previous videos that I feel like I need to improve around bends, and part of this was just trying to take them a little bit too quickly, but part of it was also not looking far enough down the road. As soon as I practiced lifting my vision up, I was able to judge them a lot more consistently. After this we swapped over and I took the lead until we finished the ride and did our final briefing. So at the end of every ride we fill out a run sheet, which is pretty much just a way to put a number on all of the competencies that we looked at during the day. They're marked from 1 to 3, with 1 being the best and 3 being the worst. First up is preparation. I know what the pre-ride checks are. I don't do them before every single ride, but I should do. Knowledge of IPSCA is pretty good and my eyesight's pretty good too. The next section is all about information, so in terms of observation, one thing I really need to work on is lifting my vision up and looking further down the road. Use of mirrors is a 2. For tech using give information, I do indicate, but this also includes things like your road positioning at junctions, so that's something I need to work on. Anticipation and hazard identification are also pretty good. Positioning around bends is pretty good, junctions and roundabouts definitely could use some work. Hazard management and vulnerable road users are both 2s, this is things like overtaking horses and cyclists. Speed is a pretty big one. I do try my best to follow the speed limits, but honestly I have a pretty bad habit of speeding very slightly, usually 2 to 3 miles per hour over the limit. There's no leeway on this, the speed limit's a hard limit and I need to stick to that. Other than that, acceleration sense and braking technique are both 2s. Gears could be better, but they're all still 2s. I'm not doing anything like trying to change gears, run corners or anything like that. Acceleration is not too bad, but can definitely use some work in certain circumstances, and that shows in the anticipation and planning section. For example, there's no point accelerating really hard if you're going to have to slow down pretty soon afterward. And for everything else, the biggest things are going to be steering and slow manoeuvring, something I really need to practice and I have started doing that. My development plan is to practice slow riding and increasing my safety bubble, especially on the so-called big roads like motorways and dual carriageways. So that wraps up my experience on my first observed ride and all the feedback I received. I'm really looking forward to getting out on my next one, and hopefully some of that was useful to you guys as well. And until next time, safe riding, and I'll see you guys in the next one.